In this episode of Rooted in Retail, we are talking about podcasting. Have you been thinking about starting a podcast for your store or just starting one because you want one? Even if you haven't been thinking about starting a podcast, this is a great episode to listen, to learn more about what's available to you, to brainstorm some ideas of a new channel for you. Because here's the deal. Podcasting has blown up. And there's a lot of pros as it relates to your business and your store. And even if you do not sell online, you're just really trying to connect with your local audience, podcasting could be a really great place for you to show up. So we're going to talk about it in this episode. So let's dive in. Welcome to Rooted in Retail, the show that's dedicated to helping independent retailers thrive in today's ever-evolving retail landscape. I'm your host, Crystal Vilkaitis, and I'm thrilled to have you join me weekly as we explore topics that are vital to the success of your store. From marketing to mindset, money to merchandising, sales to leadership, we'll cover it all. Each episode features interviews with industry experts and accomplished retailers who share their real-life insights and actionable advice. Get ready for a great conversation on how to build your dream business with Rooted in Retail. If you do have a podcast, I want to hear about it because I did a lot of research trying to find different independent type podcasts that are very niche around retailers who have storefronts who are doing podcasts. And I found a few, and I'll talk about those today. And I'm sure there's a lot that I didn't find. I need to be using the right keywords to be searching in the podcast platform to find these shows. But if you have one, send it to me because I want to know about it, and I'll share it on our social too, because other retailers might want to hear about your show. Now, here's the deal. If you like doing if you like talking, if you like doing kind of a longer form content where you are talking for a little bit longer, 15 minutes, even 10 minutes or more, then doing a show could be really great for you. And there's a chance that you've got credibility, you've got education that you know, knowledge that you could be sharing to your customers in a new way, in a new channel. And like I said, this channel is exploding and there's a lot of pros, but there are cons too. So we'll break it down in this episode. Also, I was just recently at the Retail Success Summit in Grand Rapids, Michigan with our partners, Whizbang Training. They always put on a great show. And I was talking to a couple of retailers who are twins and they're thinking about doing a show. And so we were chatting about it. And so I hope that they listen to this episode because it could give them some more insight on doing the show and if it makes sense for them or not. Because there's so many ways that we could be spending our energy and our time to connect with customers and growing our store. And we want to make sure that we're using our time efficiently and doing things that make sense for us. So podcasting could be one of those things we'll explore in this episode. But before I dive in, I want to give just a huge plug to our show, Evolve, our conference Evolve. When I was at the summit, I heard from so many retailers that were coming up to me who were either at Evolve or their friends kept talking about Evolve. And there was so much positive feedback. I loved the show, the best show I've been to. I'm still buzzing. I'm still implementing. Look at what I've done since Evolve, all the results that people have seen. And then people coming up saying, I keep hearing about Evolve. I'm so bummed I missed it this year. I'm going to be there next year. So if that's you, you've got to be in the room. This conference is made for independent retailers to help you evolve your marketing, your business, your life. I bring in awesome keynote speakers. I've got some great topics, great networking, and now's the time to get your ticket. Tickets are super, super early bird right now, meaning you can get your ticket to Evolve 2024 for only $197. That's it. $197. Plus, we have a great room block with the Gaylord, $250 a night there. It's a stunning property. If you want to upgrade to a VIP ticket, they're $497, and that includes an extra half day where we're going to do some hands-on social media work and some education. But so many of our Evolve attendees said to us, I wish it was longer because they loved it so much. So we're adding a half day education for VIP plus You're going to get some lunches, some VIP lounge access with snacks and networking and all sorts of great things with VIP too. So whichever way you go, standard or VIP, be in the room. Go to crystalmediaco.com/evolve to learn more and secure your ticket. You're not going to want to miss out. Trust me, you're not going to want to miss out. All right, let's get back to podcasting. So the thing with podcasting, I actually want to share a few examples of what I found of what retailers are doing. And I was listening to a podcast a couple of months ago, the Gary Vaynerchuk's podcast, Gary V Experience, I think is the name of his show, Audio Experience. And he was talking, he didn't give this specific show, but he mentioned a local retailer who sells Legos. And they started doing a podcast talking about Legos. And it was so successful. They were engaging, they were really growing this big audience, and Legos decided to sponsor them, doing $100,000 a year sponsorship. Now, again, he didn't say what the show name was, but that's just an example of an awesome opportunity to build yourself as a credible source and have it be another revenue stream. So we'll talk about some of those pros in this episode as well as those cons, but I did a little digging. There's the Bricks King podcast, which is in the hobby category. If you have a hobby store, there's a lot of different content you could be talking about to connect with your customers. The Atlanta Brick Co., they have their show called Between the Studs, and they have a physical storefront, Atlanta Brick Co., again, in the Lego hobby space. And so that's a great example of getting that branding because they have Atlanta Brick Co. on their graphic, in their, in their description. I didn't listen to the show, but I'm sure they're plugging their actual storefront. Also, for local, I mentioned local podcasts can be a great way to connect with your local audience, even if you don't sell online. And there's so many different local podcasts. You could actually go to your podcast app and search for your town or city. So for example, I'm in Northern Colorado. I went to Apple Podcasts and put in Fort Collins to see what kind of shows there are. Our local newspaper, The Coloradoan, has a couple of shows, but I found the Fort Collins Fellas, and they talk to businesses in Fort Collins, the mayor, trending topics around Fort Collins. And so that's an example of a show that either you could be a guest on if you had a store in Fort Collins, you could be an advertiser of, advertise on the show and be a sponsor of the show. And then also that's just an example of a local based show where you could lead the location. You could be the Fort Collins fella, the fella or the gal of your town, talking about all things in your town, not just about your store, not just about what you sell, but about things in the town and becoming that credible authority and connecting with other business owners. But the whole time you're able to sponsor on your own show and give plugs for your store, just like I did for Evolve on my own show. So that's another example from a local perspective. And I just want to make a point. This episode of Rooted in Retail is really about you having your own podcast. But I just mentioned that you could be a guest on a show or sponsor a show. And so by the end of this podcast, if you decide, I don't really think that's right for me, or I don't really have the time to commit to that, I do want you to consider still doing some research and seeing if you're finding podcasts that fit your PCGs, your perfect customer groups. Where do they listen? And is there an opportunity for you to just be a guest or advertise? That would be a lot less of your time that you'd be spending creating your own show. All right, getting back, I found, I was searching for some equestrian things. So if you had an equestrian store or a Western type store, I found the show Adulting with Horses, a podcast for weird horse girls. Had some good reviews, good engagement. If your PCG perfect customer groups are weird horse girls, then this is a great example of a show, right? So think about where is your audience? What kind of content would they be consuming? And is this right for you to do a show for them? There was another one, The Essence of Tea, where a lady goes through and talks about the history of tea and breaks down everything you need to know about tea and does tea tastings, which I think is a really fun way to engage with your listeners. It's something that I have hopes to do with my other show, Crystal Uncorked, and doing wine tastings with my listeners there, and doing wine tastings in person would be even better. But this is an example of you have a show that you're showing your expertise, and it's a whole new channel for you to build reach and exposure in front of. And then as you're building your audience, you can provide events or things to do together, like a tea tasting, to further that relationship and that connection. And that is something that's very special. It's meaningful. It's different than probably what most of your competitors are doing. And it's also not something that a big box can easily do, where you're like really getting to know the host, and then you could meet the host, you know where to go to meet them and go to their store. Like, that's just not going to happen. So it's a huge advantage for independence. I also found the Kitchen Counter podcast. It's for aspiring home cooks to grow their skills and confidence in the kitchen. So that's a great example. If you have a kitchenware store and you're really trying to target people who, want to learn how to cook, and you're using all the things you sell in your store. And, if you're just local, then you could have that be the Kitchen Counter, Fort Collins, Colorado. I wouldn't use the exact same name, Kitchen Counter, of this show that I'm talking about. Have your own, but just as an example, you can localize it within the title or within the description. Or if you do sell kitchen supplies nationwide on your e-com store, then you could have this, podcast that reaches millions across the country who just want to learn how to cook, and you're the authority source on it through this show. And you just happen to have a way for people to buy all the stuff that you're using and demonstrating in these videos and that you're talking about. So those were some of the examples I found doing just a quick search, but search for your category to see what kinds of shows are out there. Search for your town, see what's out there, what's available. Is there an opportunity? Is there nothing in your town? Maybe there's an opportunity for you to really start it. Here's the key. And part of the getting started in a podcast and doing some of that research is you need to know your audience. So who is this show for? Who are you making the show for? Is it for moms, teens, people in relationships, people who love to travel, pet owners, brides to be, they're planning a wedding? That would be a great show for a local storefront that sells wedding dresses, or in the a florist, or anything bridal related. Who's the show for? And is there enough kind of audience to get people that would be listening? You don't need millions of downloads for this to be something that grows your store, for this to be something people would want to sponsor. So it's a whole new revenue channel for you. Yeah, I think we have this misconception that we need to have, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of downloads to be considered successful and have the show be a success. It's not the case at all. It's really it's another place for you to connect with your PCGs. And if that makes sense for you with your store, your personality, your PCGs, then this could be a great way to stand out. Now, I want to talk about some of the pros and cons of starting a podcast. I have 2 podcasts. I've been podcasting since March of 2021. For me, I personally love it because it's easy for me to do videos and to talk. I like more of the longer form content. And then a major benefit of that is that my team can take pieces of my show and create a lot of social media content. So I can film a 20-minute episode, but I can get a week's worth of content out of that one episode. So that it's kind of like, it saves me time in creating all the social media posts, and there's more direct effort where all the social content is connected to the show and there's some consistency there. It really builds my brand. So that's a major benefit. That's a major pro. Another pro is a low barrier to entry. I mean, get a decent mic. You can even film. There's a good chance that your phone's mic is fine. You don't have to do video like I do. You could just be talking into your phone in a closet and upload the piece of content. You don't even have to do any editing. You don't have to add a trailer like the beginning. You don't have to have a trailer to launch. You don't have to have your bump, the intro that has a sound, song. You don't have to have the outro. Like you could just on your phone film something and upload it. I use Buzzsprout to upload. Buzzsprout.com is where I sync. So like I added my show onto all the directories, and then my podcast team will upload an episode onto Buzzsprout, and then it syndicates that episode to all the different directories that I'm on. So that's pretty easy, like low point of entry to get started. It's also super flexible because the show is yours. It could be whatever you want it to be. It could be produced whenever you want it to be. If, you have a really crazy busy month with the store because you have a lot of events and you're also traveling, like you take a month off, that is possible. You could do that. I will say that shows that tend to build loyal listeners and really build over time, those reviews and just have people listening, they are consistent. Ideally, you are posting weekly. You could get away with biweekly, but I think weekly is really the minimum with podcasting. So if you do take that month off, you might lose some of that momentum and people might be looking for you and then kind of forget about you. And then when you come back, are they going to keep listening? Hopefully, but you do have that flexibility. Or if one day it's your show and you just feel like you want to be talking about something else, then you can. If you want to promote something in store and be your own sponsor, you can. So you've got a lot of flexibility. Also, it can help develop your personal growth skills. Like the more that you are filming, you're talking, you're recording, if you're interviewing, the more practice makes perfect, right? Or practice makes progress. So the more that we do something, the more likely we are to get better at it in podcasting because, ideally you're consistent with it. It's going to train you to be better. You're also building a community. And I think this is one of the biggest pros when it comes to independent retailers is that this is one of your major advantages. We talk about this in episode 3 of Rooted in Retail with my guest, Mark Schaefer. If you haven't listened to episode 3, go back and listen to it. We talk about the power of communities. This is where independents shine. And podcasting is such a great way to build a community. People tune in weekly. They get to know you because it's a little longer form. They get to trust you. They like you. They want more from you. And this is where it can really help fill your events or do some of those fun things just for your listeners, like the tea tasting. It's just something that's really special. And a podcast can create that. I feel like, social media can create that too, as long as you're forward facing, like you're on camera, you're talking to your people, you're consistent. The thing where podcasts can do it a little bit better is it's longer form. You're talking, it's just, you're giving more information, right? Instead of a 60-second video on TikTok, and there's only so much that you could do with that, you've got a 20-minute episode where you were really vulnerable about something, or you were really entertaining about something, or you gave like epic value and tips about products you sell or how you helped a customer or just your personal life story. We connect with that and that builds that community faster than those like quick videos on social. So they both help, but podcasts really can help build that community. And also it's obviously a revenue channel. Not always. You don't have to use it that way. You don't have to have advertisers. You could be your only advertiser and advertise the show. You could not do any kind of advertisement. You just want to do interviews or teach or, share stories. This is really up to you on how you want the concept of the show and the format of the show to be. But if you did want to make some money, if that was one of your goals, that I'm going to launch this and one of the ripples of it will be that it's a revenue stream, then you do want to focus on building loyal listeners, great content, and also think about some of your vendors. They could be great sponsors of the show. So like Lego sponsored that toy store. Is there a vendor of yours that is willing to sponsor the show? And it might just be for a couple $100s a month. If you get 500, 1,000, 5,000 downloads, I'm not saying that this is how you should base it off of, okay? Because honestly, I feel like the number of downloads doesn't necessarily matter in correlation to if you have a sponsor or not. I mean, obviously you want to have some downloads, you want to have some listeners, but if you have a really niche audience, then there's going to be a possible business or vendor out there or other local business that wants in front of that group that you created, that community that you created that really loves you and really trusts you. And that might only be a couple hundred people a week. That might be meaningful to somebody that they would spend $100 or $200 a month or maybe more on that. So then of course you could work your way up. I'm sure if you Google, podcast sponsorship, there's probably formulas out there per download, what you can expect, or per impression, what you might pay. Go for that. You could search for that if you're really looking to make this, a revenue stream for you. My whole point is you could also get paid in addition to creating the community. You could also get paid in addition to being that credible authority and putting yourself out there. You could also get paid for creating social media content because you could take your 20-minute video and turn it into a week of social media content, and you have a sponsor that's paying for the show. So it helps you do that, right? There's opportunities. There's a lot of opportunities there. And then it's also a way for you to just share your passion, have people get to know you more personally on a more human level. And that, of course, connects back to building the community. It does establish that authority. I've mentioned this a lot. So when you have your own show and you're the expert on this topic, this area, this industry, these trends, you could be quoted and referenced in media, on other people's shows, invited to other people's shows, having that type of content on social media and on LinkedIn, on your website, it just shows that you are the authority by having your own show and really adds that credibility. So that's a major pro. There's also awesome networking opportunities when you have a podcast, because, for example, if you're trying to, connect with somebody and you've got a good show and it relates to this person you're trying to connect with, you could say, hey, I've got the show. Do you want to be a guest on my show? And it's a benefit for them to be on the show, but you're trying to also have them know who you are and do some networking. You could go to some meetups and say, I have the show, and find some potential guests and meet people. Also, because you have your own show, you might get asked to be on other people's shows. So that's a great networking opportunity and a great brand awareness opportunity for you as well. Another pro of podcasting is that it's accessible to listeners from the audio perspective of it. So if we're driving, we're at the gym, we're walking, we're cleaning the house. I talked to so many retailers at this past summit who listen to Rooted in Retail. So if that was you, if you came up to me at the Retail Success Summit and you said, I listen to Rooted in Retail and I love it, thank you for sharing that with me, because that really meant the world. I love hearing when you listen to the show. And I was talking to one listener who was saying, I'll listen while I'm getting ready. I'll even turn it up high enough when I'm blow drying my hair. I love the dedication. It's so amazing. But it's just easier to consume the content when we have the audio content versus having to watch something. Or like the short form content with social, we have to be on social and we have to be scrolling. It's a little bit easier to connect. So those are some of my pros. Okay. There could be a lot more pros there. Let's switch gears to the cons of having your own podcast. So of course it can be time consuming. You are recording maybe a 10-minute plus show. So sometimes you might be doing an hour long show, and you need to prep for these shows. You might need to be finding your guests. You might need to be interviewing your guests. You might be writing, scripts. You might be filming the intro and just doing a lot of research for the show, producing it. And then if you are doing the production of the show where you're actually editing, uploading, and then promoting, that can be time consuming. You can make it really simple by filming it on your phone, uploading it through Buzzsprout, and you're done. And then promote it on social so you get some listeners. That could be so simple. Or you could do something that's way more elaborate, where you are planning and scripting and researching and having guests, and then having it edited, and then having it edited even more for all your social media content. And then producing that, right? So it's up to you, but really just start somewhere. Like if you're really being pulled to do a podcast, you have some great stuff to share. You know, the audience is there. You're really excited to do it. You know, it's a new channel for you. Just get started. Don't let all the things really hold you back, but just know that can be a con that it can be time consuming. And also you really want to be consistent with it. So there's a commitment there. And so really trying to have that built within your schedule of just, you have to make it a priority. We all have the same amount of hours. There are people out there doing a ton of stuff and they have several successful podcasts and run several successful businesses. They make the time for the show because it's a priority. So if this is something you want to do, it has to be a priority. Also, going into shows and podcasting, just know that growth can take a while. I listened to this great training about podcasting. This guy has been doing it for 4 years. He now gets tens of millions of downloads a month, but it took him almost 2 years to get to that point. Almost 2 years to finally hit, I think he said a million downloads. In his first year of doing consistent shows, he would maybe get 100 listeners, 200 listeners consecutively for months. It took a while. But if he would have stopped at that 1 year, he would have missed the tens of millions that are now listening to him. You really see that, like, you're going along really, really slow and then boom, you've got that straight up line where you start seeing that growth. It takes time. If you are consistent, it's got to take time. And one tip that he gave us was to commit. Right out the gate, he said, I'm going to do this for 2 full years. I'm going to commit everything to this. I'm never going to miss a week. I'm going to make this a priority. I'm giving my all for 2 years. And if at 2 years, it doesn't make sense for me, I'll stop. And if at 2 years, it's amazing, I'm going to just keep going, right? Well, he finally hit that kind of peak around just before the 2 years. And now at 4 years, tens of millions of people listen. Like, imagine that for you. If in 4 years, a show that you were producing that's connected to your industry or just something you personally want to do was reaching tens of millions of people a month, how does that feel? Like, that's got to feel pretty amazing. For some, it might feel scary, but that's impact right there. It's pretty incredible, but the growth is slow. Okay. You got to be patient. There are also a lot of people that start podcasting, like, in a way you have a lot of competition, but in a way I feel like there's not a lot of competition because there's about 3 million podcasts. Of those, I think around 300,000 are actually active. So, and active in producing content weekly. Majority of podcasts stop after episode 7. So it shows it's the pod fade is what we call in the industry. So you're doing it and 7 episodes later and you're like, oh, I don't know if this is worth it. I don't know if I want to do this. And you stop. And that's okay. That's part of the pro of it being flexible. You could try it out, see if it's for you. If not, you could stop. But I got to tell you, you got to keep going at least past that 1 year, ideally past that 2 year to really start seeing that momentum. So there is competition, but I just feel like there's not a lot of competition because people just fizzle out so much. Another con can also be that there's a technical learning curve depending on you. You might need to be learning the software and how you're uploading. And if you want to elevate your experience, like if you're doing video like I do as well as the audio, then you might need to learn more about the camera and the mic and things like that. But just know there's a lot of resources out there. There are companies that you can hire to do this for you, and you learn as you go. You just keep filming and keep evolving and you'll keep learning. And if you do hire somebody, then there are, of course, potential costs associated with that. People who are editing and uploading and producing the show, people who are producing the content from the show, there are a cost associated with that. So, if this is something that you don't have a sponsor, you're not making money from, and it's costing you money, you got to look at your budget and you have to say, is this worth it? And only spend that money if you're willing to commit and be consistent, ideally at least for 2 years. Some other cons here, if you do have a interview type show where you bring on guests, sometimes you're like, uh-oh, my guest pipeline is getting dry. Like I need to find new people to come on the show. And it could be hard sometimes to find people to be on your show. There are matchmaking sites out there. I think matchmaker.fm is one of those where you can search for potential podcast guests based off of keywords. You could also be Googling like how to find podcast guests. There might be people, in your industry or that you meet at market, or your vendors or your reps or your friends or your family members, or, there might be times where you can't find a guest. And so you have to do a solo episode. So for me, both of my shows, the format is solo and interviews, because I don't want to just do interview based, because that does pigeonhole me into the fact that I always have to have a guest. And what if I am behind on finding a guest? What if I have just an idea that I just want to talk about and I want to do that solo? I like the ability to do that. So also guest episodes tend to take longer because you have to find your guest, figure out when you're doing the recap or when you're doing the interview. You need to send them your questions ahead of time, ideally. So they're prepped, they're ready. You do the interview. Those episodes typically are a little bit longer. And so those do take a little bit more time. So that can be a downfall of finding those guests. And then also just a con can be maintaining listeners' interests in the show. You gotta stay on top of what are they listening to, ask questions, survey them, see the episodes where you're getting a lot of downloads or a lot of shares. What was that about? Can you do more that, learn the topics and interests that your audience wants to know about, that they enjoy. What kinds of shows are they enjoying? And this takes you doing all sorts of different kinds of shows to kind of have an idea. Sometimes a show that you feel like is incredible doesn't get a lot of downloads. It could have been because something happened in, politics, time of year with holidays, a natural disaster. So you could always republish that episode months later and just say throwback, or this was previously from this date, and bring it back to see I feel like we're onto something here with this episode, but I'm going to publish it again just to see, since it didn't have a lot of listeners. But that keeping them can be a challenge. And then you really do need to promote the show, to try to get people to listen and tune in. One of the best ways to promote a podcast is to be on other people's podcasts, because they're already listening to shows. They're podcast users. You just got to be where they listen. And then if they like you, they like your style, they resonate with you, then they're much more likely to go over and listen to your podcast. You could totally market it in store to your current customer base through email, through social media, through loyalty, texting. You have an established business that you could start marketing this podcast to immediately. So that could really help build your listeners out the gate and could be a big benefit for you. But it can be a con, because we do, actively, ideally, you are promoting your show through social and getting the word out about it. So you grow those listeners and people stay, they keep coming back to listen. And then another con is just that pod fade that I mentioned, where you feel some of this burnout. You're like, oh, I've got it. I felt it. And I've paused Crystal and Corked a few times because too much was going on in my life and I just needed to cut something. And that show is more of a personal project for me. And so I cut it. It was too much. Sometimes we don't feel like sharing. And the thing is I will say, try to commit, try to do it anyways. I do have some regret of pausing my show and missing out on that momentum. And then when I was at this recent summit in Grand Rapids, several people were like, when's Crystal and Corked coming back? When's it coming back? And you're like, oh, you feel like you're letting people down because you're not doing the show and they're waiting for it. And that can cause some, pressure. But I would really encourage you to look at it differently and look at it in the sense that you get to do your show. You get to create content for your PCGs, your perfect customer groups. You get to show up with them. You get to build a community. You get this free way, this channel to connect on a whole nother way. And deeper levels, really build your business, build your brand, be the authority, be the credible source, and maybe even get paid to do it through sponsorship. So there's a lot of benefits, but there, of course, are cons as well. And if you have any questions, an idea that you're thinking for a podcast or questions about podcasting, ask me. The best way is to DM me personally, the Crystal Vilkaitis Instagram account. You can also DM the Crystal Media account. My team will tag me that there's a podcast question from the show. But I do have 2 resources for you. If you are like, yes, I think podcasting is so a place we could show up, we could leverage for our store, then Pat Flynn is who I went through his podcast course and I learned that this was the mic. I've got the Audio-Techa mic. I think that's what this is called. And I always get compliments on the quality of my audio. So, Audio-Techa, I think that's all that you would Google. And I'll link to this mic in the show notes. But he talks about how to structure the show, the concept of the show, the format, your podcast thumbnail art, your description, your launching strategy, promoting the podcast. He teaches all that stuff in there. Kathy Heller is another one that I went through her podcast course, teaches all the same stuff. She was fabulous as well. And Kathy kind of pushes you on the mindset perspective more than Pat does. Pat's a little bit more technical and systems for getting your podcast launched. She'll have technical and systems with her team, and she's going to really focus on you have a message to share. It's about getting out there, and it's about being consistent, and you are worthy of a show and more people listening to you and having your message out there. So love them both. And I have a big favor to ask, which is, if you're enjoying this show, please leave a review and or share it with a retailer friend. One of the best ways to build a podcast, if you start podcasting, you'll know this, is those reviews. These platforms really weigh heavily on those reviews. It also helps us as the host of these shows to know what you're enjoying. What episodes are you liking? What guests are you liking? You can always write several reviews. You don't have to just do one. So if there's a specific show you loved, you could write a review for that. And if you start podcasting, you're going to want to ask your people to write reviews and to share the show, because that's one of the best ways. So I have to ask, please leave a review. If you want to take a screenshot of your review and post it to social media and tag me so I can see it, I could see it from you. I would love that, because sometimes when we're writing those reviews, it's our name as we're logged into these apps. So I don't always know who these reviews are coming from. So if you want to do that, tag me. But it just really means a lot to me that you listen. If you could rate and review and share, that'd mean the world. And let me know if you have podcasting questions. If you have a podcast, send it to me. I want to tune in. And if you found this valuable, I hope that you did. I hope it answered some of those questions you might have. If it's right for you, does it make sense? It might make sense maybe next year. Maybe down the road, maybe you're trying to launch something and this is a cool way to do that together. So you've got options for sure. And I hope that this just kind of gave you some foundational stuff to work with. So I am just so rooting for your success. You know that I am. I so am. It means the world to me that you are here. And I hope that you have a great week ahead. Bye. Thank you so much for being here. It means the world to me. Don't forget to join the Rise and Shine newsletter, which is social media news you need to know, sent via email every Monday morning. Go to crystalmediaco.com/rise to join. And don't miss the newest episode of Rooted in Retail, which drops every Sunday morning.